Hey everybody. So today I want to talk about the Game Awards. And I know that it's a little late to be talking about the Game Awards, being as how they happened on the 7th and it's now the 18th as I'm recording this. So I've given it like a full 10 days past when most people were talking about it. Um, but I really wanted to mull it over because when I watched it the first time, I was extremely negative on it. I had just come back from a really pretty awful day at work. We live reacted to it on the Infinite Umbra's channel on the Fix, and I was pretty negative on it. And so I ended up rewatching it, and I rewatched it on somebody else's reaction stream because I didn't want to give the extra ad revenue to the Game Awards because frankly they don't need it. And the way I was feeling about them, I didn't really want to give them any more support than they already have. Not that it would make a difference. They had like 118 million views, so one more wasn't going to change much for them. But I've always thought that the Game Awards have been pretty awful. Um, and this year, I think, was the nail in the coffin for me hoping that they were ever going to get better. And I know that sounds insane after having just said that they had 118 million views, right? That's like Super Bowl numbers. So clearly, what they're doing is working for them. They're making a ton of money. But I think what we need to understand is that this show is not a celebration of video games, and it never was. This is a marketing beat at best and an ad revenue farm at worst. And I think this year it was very much more towards the at worst side of that spectrum. And I want to get into that because it's always really disappointed me. But this year, the awards just felt so minor, so secondary, so overlooked, so disrespected. You know, there were, I think, 32 awards given out this year. If you count the Player's Choice one, which Jeff barely counts, so I don't know necessarily if we're going to count it. But of those, I believe over 20 of them were either presented during the pre-show or were very quickly presented on a side stage where no one could receive them. And it really feels like if the show called The Game Awards cannot find stage time for these awards, then maybe they aren't worth giving out. Maybe they aren't as meaningful as people want to believe they are. And I know that's tough because some people, like the very few handful of people who actually get to accept their awards on stage, a lot of them have very emotional reactions to it. And I understand that. I mean, winning something is amazing. Getting recognition for the work that you're feeling or that you've spent so many years working on is amazing. And so I understand why they feel that way. But I've also talked to a lot of devs, and it seems like they mostly view the Game Awards as just like a networking event or a fun party to go to. And the awards are very, very secondary even to them, where it's, again, it's like it's a nice thing for them to win if they get that opportunity. But if they could win any award, what they're really looking for is either a DICE award or a BAFTA, like one of these awards that has credibility. Because even though the Game Awards is the one that gets the most views, I think more and more people are starting to view the award section of it as a joke, myself included. I mean, you look at the 22 awards or something like that. I didn't actually count that they presented off stage. I mean, I'll just run through them, right? Best family game, best innovation and accessibility, best esport athlete, esports coach, esport event, esport game, esport team, content creator of the year, best action game, best art direction, best AR VR, best mobile game, best score in music, best independent game, best community support, best fighting game, most anticipated, best RPG, best sim strategy, best sports racing, best multiplayer, player's voice. All of those, every single one of those was presented in a very disrespectful way. They were presented off stage with them just like very quickly running through who won them, like they were just basically in the way of presenting more advertisements. Or the first two, best family game and innovation and accessibility, those two, as well as I think content creator, were presented during the pre-show, which still is very disrespectful, but at least those people got a chance to speak. We saw people from Forza Motorsport come out and get to talk about the accessibility in their game. We saw Doug Bowser come out and get to talk about Super Mario for a little while, and we saw Iron Mouse had like a pre-recorded video message that she sent in, because of course she's a VTuber, so she couldn't be there like in character in person. It just wouldn't have made sense. And they at least got to speak, and that's certainly something interesting. But every single one of those other ones was not deemed valuable enough to replace an ad in a show, a 3.5 hour show called The Game Awards. And I think that's incredibly disrespectful and disappointing. And then of the ones that they did present on stage, a lot of them were also disrespected, because in response to Chris Judge going on way too long during his acceptance speech last year, they put a 30-second timer on acceptance speeches this year, where it would start flashing at them and telling them basically to get off the stage before the music started swelling, so that we couldn't even hear what they were saying. And that happened for Best Performance, when Neil Newbon was trying to tell people about how important his character was to people, specifically, I imagine, in the LGBTQ community, who felt really represented and seen, and he had to shout over the music to say, "You're not alone, we never are," which is like, read the room, whoever was playing that music. Best Narrative went to Alan Wake 2. Ed Boon had presented it. It was one of the only instances in which an actual game developer was presenting an award to another game developer, but it was nice to see for a little while, until Sam Lake got out there and got immediately played off stage again. Best Debut Indie, they had 2 people come out and they let the man speak, and then as soon as the woman went for the mic, they cut her off with music. Best Ongoing Game, which I don't know how that one made the cut to be presented on stage, as opposed to, like, you know, Best Score in Music, Best Indie. You know, there's so many other ones that I would think that would be more important than Best Ongoing Game, especially considering that the winner was Cyberpunk 2077, which is objectively not an ongoing game. They just put out some patches to unbreak a game that should have released probably in 2023 instead of when it did, because it launched in such a terrible state. Like, that's not an ongoing game. That's like a fire that took 2 years to put out. You know what I mean? Like, that's not the same thing. But it doesn't matter, because they got played off the stage as well. Best Game Direction also went to Alan Wake 2, which means that Sam Lake has the great distinction of being played off the stage twice and interrupted on 2 separate opportunities to try and thank people. And on the second instance, he was played off while he was like very visibly getting emotional about it. So that was great. And then they even played off, I forget his name, the main guy from Larian Studios, the studio head, when he was accepting the Game of the Year award and dedicating it to people on the team who had passed away during development, because they were working on it over COVID. And they played him off as well. If you don't have time to give to the person accepting the award for Game of the Year at a show called The Game Awards, what are we doing? Like, how do you put yourself into a situation where you've named the show one thing and made it so clear through your actions that it's not about that? And it was never about that. There are a handful of awards that did get sent out that didn't get cut off, I think largely because the people were pretty brief with their acceptance speeches, probably because by the time that they were going up to accept them, they had seen what had happened before and they had learned from it. So we did at least get some, you know, less disrespectful acceptances from the Hi-Fi Rush guy. When he went up for Best Audio Design, they were very brief. Games for Impact got one for Chia, although no one was there to accept it, so they just sent up Shuhei Yoshida. So I'm not sure why they bothered presenting that one on stage when surely they would have known that there was no one there to accept it in the crowd. I would have maybe swapped that for something that could actually have stage time. The Best Adaptation for The Last of Us got one, and it's like, that's not even a video game. It's one of those instances of Jeff Keighley trying very hard to appeal to Hollywood instead of appealing to his demographic, which is video games, and is a larger group and a more monetarily successful group than Hollywood has ever been. And so I don't know why he does that, but whatever. And then Best Action Adventure went to Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and that one they also didn't get played off, although they were also extremely brief. So there were a couple that got away with it, I guess, but just in general, it felt terrible to watch. And it's just like, it sucks. It sucks that this is deemed the largest game award show. Like, this is the one that so many people watch. When the DICE Awards, I watch it every single year, and it's excellent. It's an excellent show. They have great presenters. They have great speeches. There's amazing video packages for the people winning the awards. If you actually care about the video game industry and you actually care about the people who make the video games that you love, you should watch the DICE Awards. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It is such an amazing show. You're not going to get big trailers because it's not about that. It's not about looking forward to the next game and asking people for the next product. It's about saying thank you for the product that we got, which is what an award show is supposed to be, right? That's the whole point of it. And yet the Game Awards have never been that at all. It was so egregious this year, in fact, that Rebecca Valentine from IGN had to put out an article, or felt the need to put out an article, I guess I should say, where she included the speeches that people would have given if they were actually given time to make the speeches on stage. And it's a really good read. I highly recommend people go and read that, because Rebecca Valentine in a single article has been able to give game developers more respect than the Game Awards ever have. And it's extremely disappointing that that's the world that we live in right now, but it is. And then on top of that, to already be so disrespectful of what the Game Awards should be about, being so disrespectful to the people who make the games, to have also greenlit the joke that Christopher Judge made about his speech from last year being longer than the campaign for Call of Duty, which, like, yeah, man, I get that Call of Duty wasn't good. I really don't care. I'm not a Call of Duty person, but it's like, this isn't the place for that, right? Like, you don't go to the Oscars and expect people to be taking shots at other movies, and I wouldn't come to the Game Awards and expect to see people taking shots at other game developers, because it's supposed to be a celebration, and it doesn't feel like that when you allow for things like that to happen. And then we saw as a result of that a ton of Activision developers being really upset about it on social media, and I think they're completely justified in doing that, because that's like, even if that's true, which, I mean, technically it's not, because like the thing's only 8 minutes and the campaign's several hours, like obviously it was a joke, but like, even though that campaign was short, the reason is because that studio gave them such a short turnaround time on getting that campaign out, because they had to escalate what that game was sort of last minute. So it was just a rough situation for the people who worked there, and then to then also get dogged on for it at the Game Awards. It's like, read the room. Like, you work in this industry, and I don't know if Christopher Judge made that joke himself, or if it was written on the teleprompter by somebody who was also writing those really awful jokes that Sidney Goodman was making during the pre-show or something. But either way, it's like, you know this industry. You work in this industry. You should know better than to do this here. It's not the place for that. It's incredibly disrespectful. And to go back to the topic of the sort of Hollywood takeover of the Game Awards, because Jeff Keighley seems to have some just absolute obsession with Hollywood. It's almost like he respects Hollywood more than he respects the video game industry, which I don't think makes any sense, because like I said earlier, video games make significantly more money. They have a larger viewer base. Like, I don't understand why you would want to lower video games to the level of Hollywood when video games are so much larger than Hollywood has ever been, to the point where Hollywood is now trying to find the next big thing, and they're doing all of these video game adaptations to try and grab a hold of the video game marketplace, because it is so much more successful and so much more powerful than that of Hollywood. So it's really disrespectful and disappointing to see at the Game Awards for them to give so much extra time to any person who shows up, any Hollywood actor or director who shows up with any weak looking game to present. Like Matthew McConaughey came out to show off Exodus, and maybe in a different situation I might have had a little bit more appreciation for what Exodus could potentially be. It has some ex-BioWare devs working on it. He got so much time to present it because he's Matthew McConaughey and not because it's being made by BioWare people, right? That's why it got the screen time it got. And then the trailer rolled out and it looked like some of the most derivative, generic sci-fi that I've ever seen in my life. Like, it was so disappointing to hear, like, hey, we're basically just making an Interstellar / Mass Effect video game where I liked both of those things a lot. And then to see the product on screen be just like the most vanilla sci-fi game I could have ever imagined. And then Simu Liu came out from Shang-Chi, and he had a broken foot, and he got to talk about his broken foot for like 3 minutes or something, while people who are accepting awards got 30 seconds. He gets 3 minutes to talk about his broken foot before he threw to a trailer for some RTS that looked awful. And it's like, there are so many other things that we could be doing with this time, but instead we're talking about Simu's foot. And he gets to present this video game that looks awful, but the only drawing factor to it is that Simu Liu is in it, right? And I don't understand that, right? Or like Gonzo. Gonzo didn't even have a game to show. There was no Muppet game, but we always get a Muppet at the Game Awards for some reason. And he got, again, more time than any of the people accepting the awards. It's ludicrous to me, right? I think the worst one has to have been Anthony Mackie. Anthony Mackie was not only cringe, but just went on for so long of him just coming out and saying, no, you shut up, no, you shut up, and just being like the most irritating part of that show by a country mile. And of course, him being there, I guess, at least made some sense because he was in the really awful Twisted Metal show, but like, whatever. I guess him being there made sense to some degree, but to give him that much screen time on a show that we're clearly trying to cut down the time counter on, just because he's Anthony Mackie and for no other reason, is insane. Having Game of the Year presented by Timothée Chalamet, who I don't believe is in any video game this year, but you know, he's Wonka, and I guess he's going to be in that Doom movie that I think comes out next year, so that'll be something. But he's presenting Game of the Year instead of like somebody who won it last year, or a game developer. Hell, I would take Jeff Keighley himself. At least then it would be like, this is the biggest award and I am the one who is giving it out. It is my show. Like, it would be something like that, right? But instead it's like, hey, we brought in this teen heartthrob or whatever from Hollywood for no reason, and he's going to be the one that gives it out. And it's like, what are we doing? At least Timothy had the common sense or decency to not waste a bunch of time talking about his foot or telling people to show up. He just came out and did his job. And you know what? Weirdly, I really respect him for that. I don't think he should have been there, but like, he did what he was supposed to do and didn't faff about, right? So I appreciate that. And then there was that Kojima section, right? And I like Kojima well enough. I don't really like his games too much, but you know, at least he's a video game person. But the section for OD was, I think, unironically, without any exaggeration, I think was longer than all of the acceptance speeches together. I would not be surprised if that's true. That's certainly how it felt. Because they showed the trailer for it, and it had some Hollywood people in it. It had Sophie Lillis, who I love. It had, what's her name? Hunter Schafer. I think she's great. It had Udo Kier. He's also great. So, like, they were showing some things about that game that had me vaguely interested, I guess. I don't know what that game is, so I find it really hard to be actually interested in it. But he came out through the door from PT, and then there's this ARG thing that's been launched now, where people have found like the letters for the word Atami, which apparently translates to like Silent Hill if you break it down to its kanji or katakana or whatever it is. uh, and like it means, so it's like a Silent Hill game. So it's like, is this a licensed Silent Hill game and they just haven't told us yet, or is it just the spiritual successor to PT where he's bringing over those ideas? And it's like, that is interesting. If this turns out to be a PT game, be that, you know, spiritually or literally, I'm excited for that. I think that's really cool. But to give it so much time where they said so little is weird, because it's like, you're clearly making so many cuts to the time here. Why does Kojima, I mean, I know exactly why Kojima gets as much time as he does, because he's like Jeff's favorite guy in the industry, but why are we giving Kojima so much time instead of celebrating video games? We're just sitting here watching Sophia Lillis do a phoneme poem and then scream. Like, I don't know what that was about. Like, they talked for so long, it said so little, and I don't get it. I really don't get it. And I think it's wild that we spent so much time on that, on those things, on the Hollywood of it, instead of the actual awards, instead of, you know, celebrating video games and celebrating the really good year of video games that we just had, because instead we had to, you know, farm ad revenue. We had to throw in as many advertisements as possible, because that's what this show is about. It's not a celebration of video games. Like I said at the top of the video, it's not that. It has never been that. And I used to think, well, maybe it's at least a marketing beat, and I don't even know if it's that anymore. I think it is literally just a farm for ad revenue. I think it is just a way for Jeff Keighley and his team to make a boatload of money. That's what it feels like. And I don't want to disparage Jeff Keighley too much, because I don't know him, and I'm sure he's a perfectly fine human being. So I don't want to like attack him and be like, oh, he's a terrible person, he's just doing this out of greed or whatever. I'm sure that he does actually love video games, but he's just showing it in such a poor way that it makes it hard to believe that. You know, he's worked in the industry for so long. I have to assume that means that he does love video games, and that he loves this art form and he loves this medium. But watching the shows he puts on, I don't get that feeling. I just don't. And I hate that that's true. You know, and I hope that if he heard me say that he would also hate that I feel that way. But also, when you look at the show and you look at the viewership numbers that it makes so much money off of all of this ad revenue. He might just not care. You know, like this, he could put on just this one show every year, and it gets Super Bowl level viewership. Every ad is making as much money as a Super Bowl commercial, you have to assume. And this show is 3 hours of commercials. Like, that's all it ever was, right? Because all those trailers that they show, those are advertisements. I guarantee that the developers or the studios or whatever publishers pay money to get their trailers into that show. I have to assume that that's the case, because that's how advertisement works. Jeff Keighley has a platform that gets tons and tons and tons of views, and they pay money to show their trailer there because that's where they're going to get the most eyes on it, right? So, of course, he makes money off of those trailers. That's the only thing that makes sense, right? And then the ad breaks that are just more video game trailers, which I've never understood those points where they're like, oh, no, a word from our sponsors or whatever, and then they just like show another video game trailer for like some other thing. And it's like, okay, well, this is what you've been showing us the whole time, so I don't understand why this one is being designated an ad break and the other ones aren't. I don't get that. But like, there's literal advertisements, there's the trailers that are advertisements, there's the giveaways, which are also advertisements. Like the one for the Steam Deck, he wasn't doing that out of the goodness of his heart. That was Valve probably pushing that to get people to talk about the Steam Deck a little bit more, because it's a really great opportunity for them as an advertisement. So he's making money off of that. Any of the celebrity cameos where they plugged something, they would have paid for that. You know, I'm sure that whoever's publishing Exodus paid to have Matthew McConaughey go out there and plug it, because Matthew McConaughey saying things about your game is always going to be a good thing. Being able to say, hey, he's in this game is going to get more eyes and more sales for that game. So that's also an advertisement. They also sell tickets to the event, which is how Bill Clinton Kid got up there last year, right? So they're making money off of that. When I started watching the replay on YouTube, the one that's uploaded by the Game Awards YouTube channel has some of the most egregious mid-roll ads I've ever seen in anything. It's like every 5 minutes there's another ad. I had to switch to a different reaction stream of it where they weren't doing that, just so that I could get through it, because I was just like, I've watched like 6 advertisements during this show that is entirely advertisements. I'm going to I'm going to switch to some other place where I can just watch the advertisements I came here for, I guess. It's insane. It's insane, right? 118 million people are watching a show that is probably 90+% advertisements. Like the almost that entire runtime is things that Jeff Keighley and his team are directly getting paid for, right? It's not like the Super Bowl where obviously they're selling tickets and they have all the commercials, but the actual game itself is just we're watching the game. I guess you could argue that, also that increases the merchandise sales for those teams, but it's still, you understand, it's like it's a different situation. This entire show is about making money. And it's weird, right? And the argument that I always hear leveled against detractors for the Game Awards is that, oh, but it gets so much viewership and other award shows don't get that viewership. The DICE Awards don't get that viewership. The Oscars don't get that viewership. And I would say that's because that's not what it's about. The DICE Awards don't care if you watch them. The Oscars don't care if you watch them. They're televised, they're streamed, sure. They would love it, if more people watched them, I'm sure, but that's not what the show is about, right? It is about celebrating the people. It is that industry, celebrating the people who work in that industry and who have done amazing work in that industry, right? That's what award shows are supposed to be about. And if the Game Awards wants to call itself the Game Awards, then that is what it should be about as well. And I don't even think that should be considered a hot take. I think that if that is what you are calling yourself, then that you should live up to that name. And it hasn't done that. And also because it's such a heavily advertised program, it's also why they can never comment on anything that's happening in the industry, right? They can't comment on the extremely widespread layoffs, because then some of the people who did those layoffs may not advertise there anymore. If they get upset about it, if they get called out by name or something. They can't talk about the war in Palestine, because if they do, then teams that are on one side or the other politically about that situation may not advertise anymore. They are so scared shitless of upsetting some of their advertisers that they instead choose to say nothing. Last year, they didn't say anything about the situation going on at Activision because they thought that Activision would not continue to present awards there or present ads there, that's the reason why they don't say that. And it's like, you have this platform, you have the room to really make change, to really make these things known by 118 million people who watch your program, and you skip that opportunity every single time because you're afraid that you'll make slightly less money the next year. And I think that's some of the most upsetting aspects of this entire show. I think it's awful. The only time that Jeff Keighley, to my knowledge, I think, has ever spoken up about anything at the Game Awards was when Kojima got laid off. That was the only time that he took to the floor and said, I'm going to fight for this one. And it was because that was his friend. He'll stand up for his own personal friend, but he won't do so for anybody else, anywhere else on the planet. And I don't get it. I really, really don't. I don't know. This whole show is about the announcements. It's about the trailers. That's what it's all about now. That's why people watch it. That's why it has the viewership. And I get that. I really do. And I think maybe if that's the case, maybe they should just completely transition to it being just a winter marketing beat and just cut the awards out altogether. Just drop the facade of pretending that this is more than it is. And when you look at this, I do think this year in particular, if you look at it as just purely an announcement show, I mean, honestly, I think it's also pretty weak just because of how long it is. It's that thing where it's at ends with itself, right? The awards take up all the screen time from people who are accepting or giving out the awards, and vice versa, right? So you end up getting 3 hours or 3.5 hours with the pre-show of largely mediocre reveals and trailers, because it's just whoever would pay you money to put it on the show, frankly. So I come out of this 3-hour showcase, and I do have a couple of things that I was excited to see, right? I thought that Sega trailer was really good. I don't know how many of those I'll actually play, but I thought it was great. I'm really excited to see those franchises come back. I think the casting of Frank Stone is a terrible name for a game that I think will probably be pretty decent. I really like those Dark Pictures anthology games. And I've played around in the Dead by Daylight world, so to have a Dark Pictures anthology style game in that world could be interesting. Like, I'm interested in that to some degree. Visions of Mana, it's good to see that series come back again. I love that it's come. I don't know when the last Mana game came out. I think it's all been like remakes and remasters for the last little while, so it's good to see a new one. Jurassic World Survival, I think, is interesting. It's been described as like an Alien Isolation but Jurassic Park, which has me interested. I like Jurassic Park. I like Alien Isolation, even though it got weirdly low review scores, I think. Lost Records Bloom and Rage is a new thing coming out of Don't Nod, talking about the people who did Life is Strange and who did Tell Me Why, right? They're a really great team, and it looks like they're making another one that's going to be good, so I'm interested in that, of course. The Blade trailer, we can't not talk about the Blade trailer. Monster Hunter Wilds, I'm sure will be great. There was some stuff. There was some stuff in there that I am excited for those ads, right? Those were advertisements that made me happy to see them, right? But I'm starting to think maybe this isn't a good venue for them. I will not be watching the Game Awards next year. Certainly not live. I'll pick up the trailers later. Maybe I'll watch a reaction streamer do it. Just anything I can do to not send my ad revenue to the Game Awards. That's the point that I'm at. Is I don't want to support them, and I'm voting with my wallet. I'm going to continue to do that until things change, if things ever change, because I think that this is really disappointing. It's not good as an award show. It's terrible as an award show. It's mediocre as an announcement show. It's like a marketing beat. It is mediocre. I don't know what it does well other than draw people in to watch it. Like, the vast majority of the trailers that they showed were bad. Like, if you have to sit around for 3 hours to get 6 trailers that you care about, that's insane. When you watch a PlayStation showcase or an Xbox showcase, they're able to do that in 40 minutes, an hour tops. They had 3.5 hours. And because you filled it with whoever would pay you to put their trailer in it, you barely got as many as that. It's just really disappointing. I think it's genuinely upsetting that this is the award show that so many people think of as the most important one, when in my opinion it's the least important one. I think it is not the Oscars of the video games industry. It's like the Nickelodeon's children's, Kids Choice Award, right? Like, it's a joke. It's a joke, and I think it probably always has been, and I'm glad that some people are starting to wake up to that. It's just really upsetting to me. I don't have much else to say about this. I waited too long to say it already. Let me know in the comments if you feel differently about this. Maybe you really loved this show. Maybe you thought it was the best one in a while. I think there's maybe an argument to make that it had some of the better announcements in the last several years. So, maybe you're really into that. But I think that, I don't know, if you love video games as an art form and as a medium, then for you this show is a joke. But if you love video games as a consumer, as a purchaser of products, then maybe you like this more than I did. I don't know. I'd really love to hear what you guys think about it in the comments. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm wrong. But more so than that, I would actually really like it if all of you would watch the DICE Awards this year. It's not going to have announcements. They're not going to show anything for Blade. They're not going to show anything for the next Spider-Man game or a God of War DLC or whatever. But you're going to get to know the people who make the games that you love. You're going to see people talk about things that they spent years of their lives making so that you and I could play them. And I think that's what this should have been. So please go and watch that. I will be doing so. And I will not be watching the Game Awards next year, because I don't think they deserve it.